Signs of the Times, chapter 82, January the 30th, 1879. The great controversy between Christ and his angels and Satan and his angels, chapter 4, The Plan of Salvation by Mrs. E.G. White. Sorrow filled heaven as it was realized that man was lost and the world which God had created was to be filled with mortal, doomed to misery, sickness, and death. And there was no way of escape for the offender. The whole family of Adam must die. The heart of the Son of God was touched with pity for the lost race. Upon his lovely countenance rested an expression of sympathy and sorrow. Soon he approached the exceeding bright light which enshrouded the Father, and he seemed in close converse with him. The anxiety of the angel was intense while Jesus thus communed with his Father. 3 times he was shut in by the cloud of glory. The third time he came forth, his countenance was calm, free from all perplexity and trouble, and shone with benevolence and loveliness, such as words cannot express. He then made known to the angelic host that a way of escape had been made for a lost man. He told them that he had been pleading with his Father and had offered to give his life a ransom and take the sentence of death upon himself, that through him man might find pardon, that through the merits of his blood and obedience to the law of God, man could again have the favor of God and be brought into the beautiful garden and eat of the fruit of the tree of life. At first, the angels could not rejoice, for the commander concealed nothing from them, but opened before them the plan of salvation. He told them that he would stand between the wrath of his Father and guilty man, that he would bear iniquity and scorn, and but few would receive him as the Son of God. He would leave all his glory in heaven, appear upon earth as a man, become acquainted by his own experience with the various temptations with which man would be beset, and finally, after his mission as a teacher should be accomplished, he would be delivered into the hands of men. And after enduring almost every cruelty and suffering that Satan and his angel could inspire wicked men to inflict, he would die the cruelest of death, hung upon the cross, hung up between the heavens and the earth as a guilty sinner. Not merely would he suffer bodily pain, but mental agony. The weight of the sins of the world would be upon him. He told them also that after his death, he would rise again the third day and ascend to the Father to intercede for wayward, guilty man. The angels prostrated themselves before the beloved commander and offered to give their lives. Jesus told them the transgression was so great that the life of an angel could not pay the debt. His life alone could be accepted by his Father as a ransom for man. But the work of the angels was assigned them to descend with strengthening balm from glory, to soothe the Son of God in his sufferings, and to minister unto him. Also, their work would be to guard the subject of grace from the evil angels and the darkness constantly around them by Satan. With a holy sadness, Jesus comforted and cheered the angels and informed them that hereafter those whom he should redeem would be with him and ever dwell with him, and that by his death he should ransom many and finally destroy him who had power of death. And his Father would give him the kingdom and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven, and he should possess it forever and ever. Satan and sinners should be destroyed, never more to disturb heaven or those who should inherit the new earth. Jesus bid the heavenly host be reconciled to the plan that his Father had accepted and rejoiced that fallen man could be exalted again through his death to obtain favor with God and enjoy heaven. Then inexpressible filled heaven and the heavenly hosts. Then joy inexpressible filled heaven, and the heavenly hosts sung a song of praise and adoration. They touched their harps and sung a note higher than they had done before, for the great mercy and condescendence of God in yielding up his dear beloved to die for a race of rebels. Praise and adoration were poured forth for the self-denial and sacrifice of Jesus, that he would consent to leave the bosom of his Father and choose the life of suffering and anguish and die an ignominious death to redeem the fallen race. The Father did not yield up his dearly beloved Son without a struggle, whether to let guilty man perish or to give his Son to die for the lost race. It was impossible for God to change his law or give up the smallest part of its claims. In order to save man, therefore, he suffered his Son to die for man's transgression. When the plan of salvation was revealed, Satan rejoiced with his angels that he could, by causing man's fall, pull down the Son of God from his exalted position. He told his angels that when Jesus should take fallen man nature, he could overpower him and hinder the accomplishment of the plan. In humanity and inexpressible sadness, Adam and Eve left the lovely garden wherein they had been so happy until they disobeyed the command of God. The atmosphere was changed. It was no longer unvarying as before the transgression. God clothed them with coats of skin to protect them from the sense of chillness and then of heat to which they were exposed. The angels of God were commissioned to visit the fallen pair and inform them that although they could no longer retain their position of their holy estate, their Eden home, because of their transgression of the law of God, their case was not altogether hopeless. The Son of God had been moved with pity as he viewed their hopeless condition and had volunteered to take upon himself the punishment due to them and die for them that they might yet live. Through faith in the atonement which Christ proposed to make, a door of hope was opened that man, notwithstanding his great sin, might not be under the absolute control of Satan. Probation would be granted him in which, through a life of repentance and faith in the atonement of the Son of God, he might be redeemed from his transgression of the Father's law and thus be elevated to a position where his efforts to keep the law could be accepted. The angel related to them the grief that was felt in heaven, as it was announced that they had transgressed the law of God, which had made it expedient for Christ to make the great sacrifice of his own precious life. When Adam and Eve realized how exalted and sacred was the law of God, the transgression of which made so costly a sacrifice necessary to save them from utter ruin, they pleaded that they and their posterity might endure the penalty of their transgression, rather than the beloved Son of God should make this great sacrifice. The anguish of Adam was increased. He saw that his sins were of so great magnitude as to involve fearful consequences. And must it be that heaven's honored commander, who had walked with him and talked with him while in his holy innocence, whom angel worship, must be brought down from his exalted position to die because of man's transgressions? Adam was informed that an angel's life could not pay the debt. The law of Jehovah, the foundation of his government in heaven and upon earth, was as sacred as its divine author. And for this reason, the life of an angel could not be accepted of God as a sacrifice for its transgression. His law was of more importance in his sight than the holy angel around his throne. The Father could not change nor abolish one precept of his law to meet man in his fallen condition. But the Son of God, who had in unison with the Father created man, could make an atonement for man acceptable to God by giving his life a sacrifice and bearing the wrath of his Father. As Adam's transgression had brought death and wretchedness upon the race, life and immortality would be brought to light through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, a sacrifice of such infinite value as to make man who should avail himself of it more precious than fine gold, even in man than the golden wedge of Ophir. To Adam were revealed future important events, from his expulsion from Eden to the flood, and onward to the first advent of Christ upon the earth. His love for Adam and his posterity would lead the Son of God to condescend to take human nature and thus elevate through his own humiliation all who would believe on him. Such a sacrifice was of sufficient value to save the whole world, but only a few would avail themselves of salvation thus brought to them. The many would not comply with the conditions. They would prefer sin, transgression of the law of God, rather than repentance and obedience, relying by faith upon the merit of the sacrifice offered. Adam was carried down through successive generations and shown the increased crime of guilt and defilement because man would yield to his naturally strong inclination to transgress the holy law of God. He saw the curse of God resting more and more heavily upon human race, upon the cattle, upon the earth, because of man's continued transgression. He saw that iniquity and violence would steadily increase. Yet, amid all the tide of humanity, misery, and woe, there would ever be a few who would preserve the knowledge of God and would remain unsullied amid the prevailing moral degeneracy. Adam was made to comprehend what sin is, the transgression of the law. He was shown that moral, mental, and physical degeneracy would result to the race from transgression until the whole world will be filled with human misery of every type. The days of man had been shortened by his own course of sin in transgressing the righteous law of God. The race had so greatly depreciated as to become almost worthless. Because of the indulgence of the carnal mind, they are generally incapable of appreciating the mystery of Calvary, the grand and elevated facts of the atonement and the plan of salvation. Yet, notwithstanding the weakness and enfeebled mental, moral, and physical power to the human race, Christ, through the purpose for which he left heaven, continues his interest in the feeble, depreciated, degenerate specimen of humanity and invites them to hide their weakness and great deficiency in him. If they would come unto him, he will supply all their needs. When Adam, according to God's special direction, made as offered for sin, it was to him a most painful ceremony. His hand must be raised to take life, which God alone could give. It was the first time he had witnessed death. As he looked upon the bleeding victim writhing in the agonies of death, he was to look forward by faith to the Son of God, whom the victim prefigured, who was to die man's sacrifice. This ceremonial offering, ordained of God, was to be to Adam a perpetual reminder of his guilt and also a penetrable acknowledgement of his sins. This act of taking life gave him a deeper and more perfect sense of his transgression, which nothing less than the death of God's dear Son could expiate. Adam marveled at the infinite goodness and matchless love which would give such a ransom to save the guilty. As he was slaying the innocent victim, it seemed to him that he was shedding the blood of the Son of God by his own hands. He knew that if he had remained steadfast to God and true to his holy law, there would have been no death of beast nor of man. Yet in the sacrificial offerings pointing to the great and perfect offering of God's dear Son, there appears a star of hope to illuminate the dark and terrible future and relieve it of its utter hopelessness and ruin. In the beginning, the head of each family was considered ruler and priest of his household. Afterward, as the race multiplied upon the earth, men of divine appointment performed this solemn worship of sacrifice for the people. The blood of beasts was to be associated in the minds of sinners with the blood of the Son of God. The death of the victim was to evidence to all that penalty of sin was death. By the act of sacrifice, the sinner acknowledged his guilt and manifest his faith, looking forward to the great and perfect sacrifice of the Son of God, which the offering of beasts prefigured. Without the atonement of the Son of God, there could have no communication of blessing or salvation from God to man. God was jealous for the honor of his law. The transgressor of that law had caused a fearful separation between God and man. So Adam in his innocence was granted communion, direct, free, and happy with his Maker. After his transgression, God would communicate to man only through Christ and his angels.